Snow fell hard on an abandoned gas station when a billionaire stopped his car and noticed a silent little girl beneath a flickering light. He thought he was just helping for one night, until that light, and the child waiting under it, changed everything forever. Snow fell in slow, deliberate sheets, thick enough to soften the city's edges, sharp enough to sting the skin. The abandoned gas station sat alone off the service road, its cracked asphalt buried under its old canopy, sagging beneath years of neglect. One flickering fluorescent tube still worked, buzzing faintly, as if arguing with the night. Mason Vance's car slowed. The road ahead was empty, swallowed by winter. The driver mentioned a detour, but Mason barely heard him. His attention had fixed on something beneath the gas station's roof. A small shape. Still. Too still. At first it looked like a pile of discarded coats. Then the wind shifted, and the shape moved. Mason opened the door before he could talk himself out of it. Cold rushed in, sharp and immediate, slicing through the warmth of the car. His shoes crunched against snow as he walked closer, careful not to startle whatever or whoever was there. It was a little girl. She sat on the concrete near one of the rusted pump's knees, pulled tight to her chest, wrapped in a thin jacket far too light for the night. Snow dusted her dark hair and clung to the sleeves of her coat. In her arms, she held a stuffed bunny, its fabric worn smooth, its ear stitched back on with mismatched thread. She didn't cry. She didn't call out. She simply watched him. Mason stopped several feet away and crouched, lowering himself to her level. He kept his hands, visible palms open, his voice low and steady. "Hey," he said gently. "I'm not here to scare you." The girl blinked slowly. Her eyes were clear, alert, and tired in a way no child's eyes should be. She tightened her grip on the bunny but didn't pull away. Behind them, the gas station light flickered again, then steadied. And for reasons Mason would never fully understand, that small, stubborn light felt like a promise. The wind picked up, pushing snow sideways beneath the canopy. Mason felt it bite through his coat and wondered how long the girl had been sitting there. He reached into his pocket, then stopped himself. "Is it okay if I sit here?" he asked, nodding to a spot on the cold concrete a safe distance away. The girl hesitated, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Mason sat. The concrete seeped cold through his pants immediately. He welcomed it. It kept him present. "My name's Mason," he said. "You don't have to tell me yours." She studied his face as if measuring whether those words were true. After a moment, she looked down at the bunny instead. "Her name is Dottie," the girl said softly. Mason smiled. "She looks like a good listener." The girl's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Mason glanced toward the road, then back at her. "I've got something warm in the car. Hot chocolate. Would you like some?" Her shoulders stiffened. "I'm not supposed to take things, okay?" he said immediately. "No pressure. How about this? If you say no, that's perfectly fine." Snow settled into the silence between them. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. "Is it extra?" she asked quietly. "Extra what extra?" "For taking it." Mason shook his head. "No extra. No trade. Just warm." She considered that for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Mason stood, slowly retrieved the cup, and returned just as carefully. He set it down between them, not close enough to crowd her. The girl wrapped her hands around it, sighing softly, as the warmth seeped into her fingers. Steam curled into the cold air. "Thank you," she whispered, like the words themselves might cost something. "You're welcome," Mason replied. "You're not in trouble. And you're not alone." The girl didn't answer, but she leaned slightly closer to the light. Snow continued to fall, quiet and relentless. The road remained empty. Mason checked his watch, then his phone. He didn't want to rush. He didn't want to wait too long either. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked. The girl nodded, then shook her head. "My mom's working," she said. She said to wait where the light is. Mason followed her gaze up to the flickering fixture overhead. That's a smart plan, he said. Lights make it easier for people to see you. She nodded again, more confidently this time. Mason took a breath. I want to make sure you stay warm and safe tonight. That means I need to call some people whose job is helping kids and families. Is that okay? Her fingers tightened around the cup. Am I in trouble? No. Mason said without hesitation. You didn't do anything wrong. Needing help isn't wrong. She searched his face, then asked, will my mom be mad? Mason chose his words carefully. I think she'll be worried, and then relieved. After a moment, the girl nodded. Mason stepped a few feet away and made the call calm, clear, precise. He explained where they were, what he'd found, and what he hadn't assumed. He listened more than he spoke. When he returned, the girl looked up at him. Snowflakes melted in her hair. They're coming, he said, just to help us figure things out. She nodded, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled hospital bracelet. The ink was faded, but the name was still there. Ivy, she said softly. That's me. Mason felt the name settle into his chest. Well, Ivy, he said, smiling gently. I'm really glad the light stayed on tonight. Above them, the old gas station hummed stubborn and bright against the snow. The snow thickened as the minutes passed, falling heavier now, muting the world, until even the distant hum of traffic faded into nothing. The abandoned gas station felt like an island suspended in white. Just Mason. Ivy, the light. Mason shrugged out of his coat slowly, deliberately, as if each movement were a question asking permission. He draped it across Ivy's shoulders without touching her, letting the weight settle gently. She stiffened at first, then relaxed when she realized he wasn't pulling it tighter himself. Her small hands gripped the fabric, drawing it closed. Thank you, she said again, quieter this time. Mason nodded and sat back down, keeping his posture loose, unthreatening. The cold pressed in harder now, but Ivy was no longer shivering. They listened together to the soft hiss of snow against concrete. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, Mason said after a while. You waited where it was bright. My mom said lights don't fall asleep, Ivy replied. People do, but lights don't. Mason glanced up at the buzzing fixture overhead. The idea lodged itself somewhere deep inside him. That's a smart rule, he said. Ivy took a careful sip of the cocoa, then another. Her breathing slowed. The bunny Dottie rested under her chin, now no longer clenched like a lifeline, but held like a companion. Mason checked his phone again. A text came through from the dispatcher, units en route. ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes could feel like nothing or everything, depending on who you were. A gust of wind tore through the open side of the canopy, scattering snow across the ground. Ivy flinched, not in fear, but reflexively, like someone bracing for a door to slam. Mason shifted, positioning himself slightly between her and the wind, careful not to crowd her. Can I ask you something? Ivy said suddenly. Sure. Are you a helper, or just someone who stopped? Mason thought about that, about boardrooms and contracts and numbers that moved people without ever touching them. I think he said slowly, I'm someone who stopped, and that makes it my job to help. Ivy considered this answer, then nodded, satisfied. The light above them flickered once, and stayed on. The sound came first, a distant engine crunching through snow tires, complaining against ice. Ivy's head lifted immediately. They're here, she asked. Almost, Mason said. Red and white lights appeared at the far end of the service road, blurred by snowfall. Not sirens, just steady, careful movement. Two adults approached on foot, boots sinking into snow. They wore winter coats marked with city insignia and soft, practiced expressions. One knelt a few feet away from Ivy, mirroring Mason's posture. Hi there, the woman said gently. I'm Claire. This is Ben. We're here to help. Ivy glanced at Mason. He nodded. They're the helpers I told you about. That seemed to matter. Ivy relaxed just enough. Claire spoke calmly, asking simple questions. Was Ivy hurt, cold hungry? Ivy answered honestly, shaking her head, then nodding when appropriate. No pressure, no interrogation. When Claire asked if Ivy had anything that belonged to her, Ivy hesitated. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a thin, crumpled band of plastic. A hospital bracelet. Mason's breath caught, but he kept his face neutral. Claire took it carefully, reading the faded print. Ivy Lark, she said aloud, as if grounding the name in the cold air. That you? Ivy nodded. Okay, Claire said. Thank you for showing me. That helps. Helps what Mason wondered. Find her mother, trace a visit, prove someone had once checked in. All he knew was that this small piece of plastic carried weight far beyond what it was meant to hold. Ben offered Ivy a thermal blanket, showing her how it worked before placing it around her shoulders. Ivy allowed it, tucking Dottie beneath it like a secret. She's been doing everything right, Mason said quietly to Claire. I didn't want to assume anything. Claire met his eyes. There was relief there. You did the right thing calling. Snow continued to fall as the group stood beneath the canopy, the abandoned gas station now feeling less forgotten. The light above them hummed steady and bright. The vehicle was warm inside, fog blooming instantly on the windows as the door closed. Ivy sat in the back seat between Claire and Ben, bundled in the blanket, Dottie peeking out from under her arm. Mason took the seat across from her, angled slightly away so she wouldn't feel watched. The heater hummed. Snow tapped softly against the glass. We're going to a clinic nearby. Claire explained, her voice even. Just to make sure you're okay, and to help us get in touch with your mom. Ivy nodded. She works late. Then she's probably very tired, Claire said, and very worried. That made Ivy's fingers curl into the blanket. Mason leaned forward slightly. We'll make sure she knows you're safe. Ivy looked up at him. You're coming too, yes, Mason said. If that's okay with you. She considered, then nodded once. Okay. The car pulled away from the abandoned gas station. Mason watched the canopy recede, the single light shrinking until it was just another point against the snow. At the clinic, everything was calm, bright, clean, voices low. Ivy was offered juice and crackers. A nurse explained each step before doing anything at all. Ivy listened closely, serious and attentive. Mason signed forms only after they were read aloud and explained. Temporary, non-invasive, focused on comfort and contact. While Ivy sat coloring at a small table someone had found crayons, Claire stepped aside with Mason. We'll locate her mother, Claire said. It may take a bit. Late shift, bad weather. I can stay, Mason replied without hesitation. Claire studied him for a moment, then nodded. She seems calmer with you nearby. Mason glanced through the glass at Ivy, who was drawing a large circle in yellow crayon. That's the light, Ivy said when she noticed him watching. So it doesn't turn off. Mason smiled, something warm and unfamiliar spreading through his chest. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside everything was steady. Time moved differently inside the clinic. The wall clock ticked with exaggerated patience, each second stretching longer than the last. Outside the glass doors, snow continued its quiet work, layering the world in white. Inside, warmth held steady. Ivy sat cross-legged at the small table, carefully coloring inside the thick yellow circle she had drawn earlier. Dottie rested beside her, propped upright as if watching. Mason sat a few chairs away, his phone dark in his hand. For once, there were no emails worth opening. Claire returned with a clipboard and a gentle smile. We're narrowing it down, she said softly. Your mom works nights, right? Ivy nodded. She said the clock doesn't stop for anyone. Mason felt that land somewhere deep. Claire continued. We've got 2 warehouses in the area with late shifts. Weather slowed things down, but we're making calls. Ivy's shoulders tightened just a little. She's not in trouble, right? No, Claire said immediately. She's doing what parents do, working. Sometimes nights just get complicated. That seemed to ease Ivy. She went back to her drawing, adding small lines around the yellow circle like rays. Mason leaned closer, not too close. What are those, so it looks awake? Ivy said. Lights get tired if you don't remind them. Mason smiled. Then it's good you're here. Minutes passed, then more. The clinic hummed with quiet routines, paper sliding, distant footsteps, a soft chime from a monitor down the hall. No alarms, no rush. Finally, Claire's phone buzzed. She stepped aside, listened, nodded once, then twice. When she returned, her smile was brighter. We found her, she said. Your mom's name is Elena Lark. Ivy's head snapped up. She's okay, Claire confirmed. She's been looking for you. Ivy exhaled a long breath she'd been holding all night. Mason felt his own chest loosen in response. Can I see her? Ivy asked. Yes, Claire said. Very soon. The clock kept ticking, but now it sounded different. Elena Lark arrived wrapped in a borrowed winter coat, snow clinging to the cuffs and shoulders. Her hair was pulled back hastily, strands escaping around her face. The moment she saw Ivy, everything else disappeared. Ivy, she breathed. Ivy was out of her chair instantly, small feet padding across the tile. Elena knelt just in time to catch her pulling her close, burying her face in her daughter's hair. She laughed and cried at the same time, the sound breaking and mending in the same breath. I'm here, Elena whispered. I'm here. I'm so sorry I was late. Ivy shook her head against her mother's shoulder. I waited where the light was. Elena closed her eyes, holding her tighter. You did exactly right. Mason stood back, giving them space. He watched Elena rock Ivy gently the way a tide steadies a boat after a storm. It was not dramatic. It was human. Claire approached Elena calmly, explaining what had happened, what steps had been taken, and why. There was no accusation in her tone, only clarity. Elena listened, nodding her arm, never loosening around Ivy. When Claire gestured toward Mason, Elena finally looked up. Her eyes were wary at first. Tired. Protective. He stopped, Claire said simply. And he called. Elena studied Mason, then gave a small nod. Thank you, she said, voice thick, for not walking past. Mason shook his head. She told me to wait by the light. I just listened. That seemed to matter. Ivy tugged gently at Elena's sleeve. This is Mason. He brought cocoa. Elena smiled faintly. Then I owe you more than a thank you. No, Mason said softly. You don't. The snow outside intensified, swirling past the clinic windows. Elena glanced at it, worry flickering across her face. The buses are delayed, she said. And we've arranged a warm place for the night, Claire said. Just until morning. Everything by the book. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Ivy looked between them. Can Mason come? All eyes turned. Mason crouched slightly. Only if your mom says it's okay. Elena looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at Mason. If you'd like, she said carefully. Mason smiled. I'd like. The hotel room was small but clean, warmed by a steady heater that hummed like a promise. Snow tapped gently against the window, softer now, less demanding. Ivy sat on the bed in fresh pajamas, legs swinging, Dottie tucked beneath her arm. Elena sat beside her, exhaustion finally settling into her bones. Mason remained near the door, giving them room. Claire finished her final notes, then smiled. We'll check in again in the morning, she said. If you need anything, you call. After she left, the room grew quiet. Ivy looked up at her mom. The light didn't turn off, she said proudly. Elena brushed Ivy's hair back. No, she replied. It didn't. Mason cleared his throat gently. I should head out, he said. You both need rest. Ivy's face fell just a little. Elena noticed. It's okay, she said. We're safe. Mason nodded. I'll be nearby, just in case. That answer seemed to settle Ivy. She slid under the blanket, eyes already drooping. "Good night, Mason," she murmured. "Good night, Ivy." As Mason stepped into the hallway, he paused, looking back once more. Elena met his gaze, gratitude quiet but unmistakable. Outside, the storm eased. The world felt paused, as if holding its breath. Back at the abandoned gas station, the single light continued to glow, stubborn and bright, beneath the falling snow, marking the place where everything had begun. And somewhere between that light and this warm room, something fragile and hopeful had taken root. Morning arrived quietly, as if unsure it was welcome. Snow still covered the city, but the storm had passed. Pale winter light slipped through the thin curtains of the hotel room, landing softly on Ivy's face. She stirred, then smiled faintly when she realized where she was. Elena woke moments later, blinking as the weight of the night returned to her all at once. Relief came first, then exhaustion. Ivy sat up, clutching Dottie. "It's still light outside," she said. Elena followed her gaze to the window. Snow makes everything brighter. A knock came at the door, gentle, unhurried. Mason stood in the hallway with 2 paper bags and a cautious smile. He didn't step inside until Elena waved him in. "I brought breakfast," he said. "Nothing fancy, just warm." They ate together at the small table, toast, eggs, juice. Ivy took her time, savoring each bite like it mattered. Mason noticed she always looked to her mother before reaching for something new. After breakfast, Claire returned, clipboard in hand. "Today's about next steps," she explained calmly. "No rush, no pressure." She outlined options: transportation assistance, a short-term housing program, closer to Elena's work, after-school care for Ivy during late shifts. Everything explained, everything voluntary. Elena listened carefully, nodding, asking questions. Ivy colored beside them, drawing the gas station again, but this time the light was brighter and people stood beneath it. Mason stayed quiet, resisting the urge to fix everything at once. At the end, Claire turned to Elena. "Would you like help getting home?" Elena hesitated. "I don't want to burden anyone." Mason finally spoke. "Support isn't a burden, it's a bridge." Elena looked at Ivy, then she nodded. Outside, the snow reflected the morning sun. The city felt gentler somehow, and the night, long and heavy, was finally letting go. By midday, the hotel room had transformed into a temporary planning space. Forms lay neatly stacked on the desk. Claire moved through them methodically, explaining each page before a pen ever touched paper. There were no surprises, no assumptions. Mason watched Elena read every line, her brow furrowed with concentration. She wasn't rushing. She was protecting her child the only way she knew how, by understanding. Ivy sat on the floor, arranging crayons by color. Dottie presided over the operation like a small, quiet supervisor. "Can I draw on this one?" Ivy asked, holding up a blank corner of scrap paper. "Absolutely," Claire said. "It's your art studio." As Ivy drew, Mason leaned closer to Elena. "If any of this feels wrong," he said quietly, "you can say no." Elena met his eyes. "That's why I trust this." The words settled between them, steady and earned. One form required a temporary contact, someone to call if Elena was delayed at work, or if weather disrupted transportation again. Elena hesitated, pen hovering. Mason didn't move. After a moment, Elena wrote his name. Mason felt the weight of it immediately, not ownership, not control, but responsibility. "I'll answer," he said simply. "Anytime." Ivy looked up. "You're in my circle now," she declared, tapping her drawing where 3 figures stood beneath a large yellow light. Mason smiled. "I'll do my best to earn that." By the time the last form was signed, the afternoon light had begun to fade. Snowplows passed outside, clearing paths through the city. Claire gathered the paperwork. "This is a good start," she said. "A very good one." As she left, Elena exhaled deeply, like someone setting down a heavy bag after a long walk. "I didn't know it could feel like this," she admitted. Asking for help. Mason nodded. Neither did I. Before parting ways, Ivy tugged gently at Mason's sleeve. Can we go see it? She asked. Mason understood immediately. The light, she nodded. The car rolled slowly down the service road, tires crunching over packed snow. The abandoned gas station came into view, quieter in daylight, but still standing still, waiting. They parked beneath the canopy. The fluorescent light was off now, unnecessary in the pale afternoon glow. Ivy frowned slightly. Mason crouched beside her. Lights rest too, he said, but they're still there. Ivy seemed satisfied with that. She walked to the spot where she had sat the night before, placing Dottie carefully on the concrete. Then she stood back and looked up at the canopy. Thank you, she whispered, not to Mason, not to her mother, but to the place itself. Elena watched, eyes shining. Mason studied the rusted pumps, the cracked concrete, the forgotten space that had somehow become a turning point. He imagined what it could be, a shelter from storms, a place that stayed lit when everything else shut down. As if sensing his thoughts, Elena spoke softly. Not everyone would have stopped. Mason shook his head. Not everyone saw what I saw. What did you see? Ivy asked. Mason smiled down at her. Someone worth stopping for. Snow began to fall again, light and slow, dusting the ground like punctuation. They walked back to the car together, leaving no trace behind except the memory of a light that stayed on long enough to change 3 lives. And this time they didn't need it to flicker, because they carried the warmth with them. The days that followed moved with a careful rhythm, as if everyone involved were afraid to step too hard and break something fragile. Elena returned to work on modified hours. Her schedule adjusted with help from the city program Claire had arranged. Ivy began attending a small after-school center 2 blocks from their apartment, warm, bright, filled with quiet voices and soft music. Mason checked in daily, never unannounced, never intrusive, always respectful of the space between help and home. That space mattered. One afternoon, Mason sat in his car across the street from the center, engine off, watching Ivy through the window as she worked on a puzzle with 2 other children. She leaned in, focused, her tongue caught briefly between her teeth. She laughed when a piece clicked into place. The sound surprised him. He realized how rarely he had heard real laughter lately. Not the polite kind from boardrooms or charity galas, but the unguarded kind, earned, not performed. Tessa called from the passenger seat, clipboard resting on her knee. The housing coordinator says there's an opening near Elena's warehouse. Shorter commute. Better lighting. Mason nodded. Let Elena decide. She already did, Tessa said gently. She asked if it was okay to say yes. Mason felt that familiar pull, the instinct to solve, to accelerate. He resisted it. Tell her it's her call, he replied. I'm just here to support. Tessa smiled faintly. You're learning. Later that evening, Mason visited Elena's apartment, not inside, just standing in the hallway, while Elena stepped out to speak with him. Ivy waved from the doorway, Dottie tucked beneath her arm. Elena looked tired, but steadier now. They offered the new place, she said. It feels too good. Good doesn't mean dangerous, Mason replied. Sometimes it just means timely. Elena exhaled slowly. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Mason understood that feeling all too well. I don't think safety feels loud, he said. I think it feels quiet. Boring even. Elena considered this, then nodded. Inside the apartment, Ivy held up a new drawing when Mason glanced her way. It showed 3 figures standing between 2 places. The apartment on one side, the gas station canopy on the other. Between them was a long path lit by small yellow dots. Those are lights, Ivy explained, so we don't forget where to go. Mason swallowed. That night, as he drove home, the city lights blurred against the windshield. For the first time in years, his penthouse felt less like a destination and more like a pause. The move happened on a Saturday morning under a sky the color of clean paper. Snow had melted into slush along the sidewalks, leaving the city damp but hopeful. The new apartment wasn't large, but it was bright. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, catching on freshly painted walls. The heating worked. The stairwell smelled faintly of coffee from a neighbor's open door. Ivy explored every corner with quiet seriousness, opening cabinets, tapping walls, testing the echo of her voice. Dottie supervised from under one arm. "This one feels awake," Ivy declared. Elena laughed a full, surprised sound. "I think you're right." Mason arrived later carrying a small box. He set it down near the door without comment. "What's that?" Ivy asked. "A nightlight," Mason replied. "Only if you want it." Ivy peeked inside, then nodded solemnly. "Lights are important." They plugged it in together. A soft, warm glow filled the corner of the room, not too bright, not demanding attention. Just present. As the afternoon passed, Elena unpacked, slowly placing items with intention. She paused often, grounding herself, reminding her hands that this space was real. No one rushed her. Mason stayed only as long as needed, helping assemble a small bookshelf, tightening a loose handle on the bathroom door. When he finished, he stepped back, giving the room back to its owners. At the doorway, Elena hesitated. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. "I don't want you to feel obligated." Mason met her gaze. "I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because I chose to stop that night." Elena nodded, eyes shining. "Then thank you for choosing us." On his way out, Ivy ran over and pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. "For your office," she said. Later, Mason opened it alone. It was another drawing of the gas station, but this time the canopy was gone. In its place stood a small building with wide windows and a glowing sign that read, "Stay lit." The image stayed with him. That evening, Mason met with Rowan Pierce at a quiet diner. Steam rose from their mugs as snowmelt dripped outside. "You're careful," Rowan said. "That matters." "I don't want to get this wrong," Mason replied. Rowan nodded. "Trust takes time, but you're giving it room to breathe." As Mason left the diner, he glanced down the service road out of habit. In the distance, the abandoned gas station waited, and for the first time he wondered what it could become. The idea came to Mason slowly, like dawn. He stood across the street from the gas station, one early morning, hands tucked into his coat, breath fogging the air. The canopy loomed silent now, stripped of snow exposed in daylight. Rust streaked the pumps. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. It didn't look hopeful. But Mason had learned something important over the past weeks. Hope rarely announced itself. He called Tessa. "I want to buy it," he said. "The gas station?" she asked, startled. "Yes," quietly. Within days, the paperwork began, not rushed, not flashy. Zoning, permits, community review. Mason insisted on meeting with local residents, first listening more than he spoke. At a small community hall nearby, he sat among folding chairs and lukewarm coffee. Elena was there, Ivy beside her feet, swinging. "What happens if it fails?" someone asked. Mason answered honestly. "Then we learn, and we keep helping people another way." Ivy raised her hand. Everyone turned. "Will the light stay on?" she asked. Mason smiled. "That's the whole point." The plan was simple: transform the abandoned station into a community rest stop, a warm place, clean bathrooms, charging stations, information boards. A shelter from storms, not a solution to everything, but a start. When the meeting ended, Ivy tugged Mason's sleeve. "You're making it awake again." "Yes," Mason said softly. "Together." Construction began weeks later. Ivy visited often, wearing a bright knit hat, Dottie peeking from her backpack. She watched workers replace wiring, scrub walls, install new lights that didn't flicker. One afternoon, she stood beneath the canopy and flipped a switch. The lights came on, steady, bright, unwavering. Elena watched from a distance, hand over her mouth. Mason felt something settle into place. Not pride, not ownership, purpose. The night the lights were tested, snow fell again, light and quiet. Ivy stood beside Mason under the canopy looking up. "It's not scary anymore," she said. No, Mason agreed. "It's not." And as the glow spilled across the pavement, reaching farther than it ever had before, Mason realized something profound. Stopping once had changed a night. Staying changed everything. The first night the lights stayed on, Mason didn't go home right away. He stood beneath the canopy long after the electricians packed up, listening to the quiet hum of new wiring settling into its job. The glow spilled evenly across the pavement, revealing details that had once been swallowed by shadow oil stains faded to pale ghosts. Cracks stitched together with fresh concrete, a bench newly bolted in place. Across the street, Elena and Ivy watched from the sidewalk. Ivy bounced on her toes, counting the seconds the lights didn't flicker. 1, 2, 3. She grinned when she reached 20. "They're brave lights," she announced. Mason crossed the street and knelt beside her. "Brave because they stay," he said. She considered this. Staying is harder than turning on. Elena smiled at her daughter's certainty, then looked at Mason. "She's been sleeping through the night," she said quietly. "The nightlight helps." Mason nodded, something warm and steady filling his chest. "I'm glad." As days turned into weeks, the work of staying revealed itself to be less dramatic than Mason had imagined, and far more demanding. Meetings with inspectors, conversations with neighborhood leaders, a rotating schedule of volunteers trained to welcome, not question. Clear rules posted in simple language: everyone deserves warmth, everyone deserves dignity. Rowan Pierce stopped by one afternoon, coffee in hand. "You've done this the right way," he said, surveying the space. Slow, transparent. "I'm trying," Mason replied. Rowan nodded. "That's usually enough." Ivy began stopping by after school, her backpack thumping against her coat. She helped stock shelves with gloves and scarves, lining them up by color. She took the job seriously, reminding adults to label bins and keep the floor clear. "This is a walking place," she explained. "People shouldn't trip when they're tired." Mason watched her with a quiet awe. Not because she was extraordinary, but because she was becoming herself again. One evening, snow returned in soft flurries. A man paused beneath the canopy, rubbing his hands together for warmth. A woman followed, then another. No crowds, no spectacle. Just people finding shelter. Ivy stood close to Elena, holding Dottie. She didn't stare. She didn't hide. She simply stood where the light was. Mason realized then that this steady presence was the real work. Not the building, not the funding, the staying. Winter settled into a calmer rhythm. The city moved again, buses ran on time, sidewalks cleared, routines returned. For Elena and Ivy, mornings now began with predictability. Breakfast, school, a walk past the community station where Ivy waved at the lights like they were old friends. Mason returned to his office, but something had shifted. His calendar still filled, his phone still rang, but he left at reasonable hours. He declined interviews. He redirected praise to the volunteers and the neighborhood council. When Tessa teased him about it, he just smiled. "This isn't about me." One afternoon, Mason received a message from Elena. "Ivy's school has a family day. Would you like to come?" He read it twice before replying. "If that's okay with both of you, I'd be honored." The gym smelled like floor polish and crayons. Paper chains hung from the ceiling. Ivy spotted Mason immediately and ran over, stopping just short of colliding with him. "You came," she said, delighted. "Wouldn't miss it," Mason replied. Elena watched from across the room, a quiet smile on her face. There was no tension now, no fear of misunderstanding. Just shared space. Ivy led Mason to a display board. Her project was titled, "Places That Keep You Safe." There was her apartment, her school, the after-school center, and the gas station. Mason crouched to read the caption beneath it, written in careful block letters. "Sometimes safety is just a light that waits for you." He swallowed. The rest of the day passed without incident. No emergencies, no conflicts. Just shared snacks, awkward small talk, laughter echoing off gym walls. As they walked out together, Elena said something that surprised him. "I don't feel like I'm bracing anymore." Mason nodded. "Neither do I." That evening, snow dusted the sidewalks again. Ivy skipped ahead, her breath puffing out in clouds. This was a good day, she declared. Yes, Mason agreed, it really was. And the remarkable thing was not a single thing had gone wrong. The city installed a small sign a month later. Nothing flashy, just reflective lettering mounted near the service road, "Community Warming Station, open nightly." Ivy stood on the curb with Elena and Mason as the sign went up, her hat pulled low over her ears. "It has a name now," she said. Mason smiled. Names help people find things. That night, the station welcomed more visitors than usual. A bus reroute had left several people stranded in the cold. Volunteers moved calmly, offering warmth and directions. No one hurried. No one panicked. Ivy helped refill cups with water, careful not to spill. She moved with confidence, not fear. Elena watched her daughter, eyes shining. "She trusts the world again," she whispered. Mason felt the truth of it settle into him. Later, as the evening quieted, Ivy climbed onto the bench beneath the canopy. Mason sat beside her, hands wrapped around a mug. "Do you remember the first night?" Ivy asked. "Yes," Mason said. "I thought the light might turn off," she admitted. "I stayed awake to watch it." Mason looked up at the steady glow above them. "It didn't." "No," she said softly, "and now it won't." They sat in companionable silence, snow drifting lazily through the air. Across the street, cars passed, their headlights briefly intersecting with the canopy's glow before moving on. Ivy leaned against him, not clinging, just resting. "I think," she said after a while, "that lights are like people." Mason smiled. "How so?" "They don't have to be big," she explained. "They just have to stay." Mason nodded, feeling the weight and simplicity of the truth. When it was time to leave, Ivy hopped down and took Elena's hand. She waved once more at the station before walking away. Mason stayed behind for a moment, watching the light cast its steady circle across the pavement. It had become a landmark now, not just on maps, but in memory. A place that stayed lit. A place that taught him what it meant to stop once, and then choose to stay. Fear didn't return with noise. It didn't announce itself with sirens or raised voices. It arrived the way winter sometimes did, quiet, ordinary, almost reasonable. It was a Tuesday evening when Elena collapsed at the kitchen sink. Not dramatically, not suddenly. Just a moment where her hand slipped from the counter, her breath caught, and the room tilted enough for her to sit down hard on the floor. Ivy was at the table coloring. "Mama," she called. Elena answered immediately, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I'm okay, just dizzy." But Ivy was already moving, careful and precise, the way she'd learned to be. She grabbed her jacket, then paused, remembering the rules. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She called Mason. He arrived in minutes, coat, half-zipped hair, still damp from the snow outside. He knelt beside Elena, asking calm questions, keeping his voice low and even. Elena insisted she was fine. Exhaustion, she said. A skipped meal. Too many double shifts. But Mason had learned something important over the past months. Fine didn't always mean safe. At the clinic, the doctor was kind and thorough. Dehydration, fatigue. Nothing severe, but a warning. A reminder that recovery wasn't linear, and strength had limits. Ivy sat quietly in the waiting room, Dottie in her lap, eyes fixed on the clock. "It won't stop, right?" she asked Mason softly. "The light." Mason understood what she meant. "No," he said. "It won't." But later, alone in his car, Mason felt the old helplessness creep back in. The knowledge that money couldn't solve everything, that systems took time, that people, good people, could still falter. That night, Ivy refused to sleep in her own bed. She curled up on the couch beside Mason's blanket tucked under her chin. Sometimes she whispered, "I think if I stay awake, bad things won't happen." Mason swallowed. He didn't say everything would be fine. He said, "You don't have to guard the world alone." She leaned against him, breathing slowly, until sleep took her. Outside, snow fell again, light, persistent, and Mason stayed awake not out of fear, but out of choice. Elena recovered quickly, but something had shifted, not in her body, in her understanding. She sat at the small kitchen table 2 days later, sunlight spilling across the floor, Ivy at school, the apartment quiet. Mason sat across from her, hands folded, listening. "I can't do this alone forever," Elena said, "and I don't want to pretend I can." Mason didn't interrupt. "I want Ivy to grow up knowing help doesn't disappear," she continued. "Not when things get inconvenient. Not when people get tired." She met his eyes. "And I trust you." The word carried weight. Mason exhaled slowly. "Then let's do this the right way. Long-term support, legal, clear boundaries, stability." They talked for hours, about guardianship contingencies, about education funds, about healthcare access and emergency plans that didn't rely on panic. Nothing rushed. Nothing hidden. Weeks later, Mason sat in a quiet courtroom with Elena beside him. Ivy sat in the back row with Tessa, feet swinging, hair neatly braided. The judge spoke carefully, reviewing the arrangements. Shared guardianship support, documented consent, oversight, reviews scheduled, not dramatic, not cinematic, real. When the gavel came down, Ivy didn't cheer. She just smiled, small and sure. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily through the air. So Ivy said, walking between them, holding both their hands, "This means we're a team." Elena knelt. "Yes, a team." Mason nodded, "The kind that stays." That evening, they walked past the community station together. The lights glowed steadily, reflecting off fresh snow. Ivy stopped and looked up. "It didn't turn off," she said. "No," Mason replied. "And it won't." She squeezed both their hands, satisfied. The world hadn't become perfect, but it had become reliable. And sometimes, Mason realized, that was the greatest gift you could give a child, not a rescue, not a miracle, but a promise that didn't flicker when winter returned. The first spring after the winter felt hesitant. Snow lingered in corners of the city, where the sun hadn't yet learned to reach. The air was still sharp in the mornings, but something had changed. The cold no longer felt endless. It felt temporary. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, Ivy stood at the edge of the old service road, holding a pair of scissors almost as big as her hand. She wore a yellow knit hat, her favorite color, pulled low over her ears, even though the weather no longer demanded it. The abandoned gas station wasn't abandoned anymore. The rusted pumps were gone, replaced by wide open space. The cracked concrete had been smoothed, painted with simple lines guiding footsteps safely through. The canopy still stood, but now it was clean, reinforced, and crowned with lights that no longer buzzed or flickered. They simply glowed. A small crowd gathered beneath it. No stage, no banners. Just neighbors, volunteers, a few city workers, and people who had quietly come to rely on this place when nights grew too cold or days too uncertain. Mason stood a step behind Ivy, and Elena, hands in his coat pockets, watching Ivy's eyes move from face to face. She wasn't nervous. She was focused, like she understood this moment mattered. Rowan Pierce leaned in slightly. "Ready?" Ivy nodded. At the count of 3, she cut the ribbon. Applause followed, not loud, not overwhelming, but warm, the kind that rose and settled like a shared breath. Elena wiped her eyes, laughing softly at herself. "I didn't think it would feel like this," she said. Mason glanced at her. "Like what? Like we built something without having to prove anything." He smiled. "That's because we did." Inside the station, the space hummed gently with life. A coffee urn steamed quietly. Shelves held gloves, scarves, bottled water. A bulletin board displayed schedules, resources, handwritten notes from volunteers. Everything was simple. Everything was intentional. Ivy walked through it slowly, her hand brushing the edge of the counter, her fingers tracing the smooth wall where the old paint had once peeled. She stopped beneath the canopy and looked up. The light above her was steady, bright, unafraid. Mason watched her from a distance, struck by how tall she seemed now. Not physically, but in the way she stood. The way her shoulders rested, easy, no longer braced. Elena joined him. "She sleeps with the window cracked now," she said quietly. "Even when it's cold." Mason raised an eyebrow. "She says she likes hearing the city." Elena continued. "She says it reminds her the world is still moving." He nodded. "That's a good reminder." As evening approached, people drifted away one by one. Volunteers stacked cups, wiped counters, turned signs from "Open" to "See you tomorrow." Ivy helped, taking her role seriously. She placed Dottie carefully on a bench, then folded a blanket with practiced care. "Lights first," she reminded an adult nearby. They laughed gently. Lights first. When the last car pulled away, and the street grew quiet, Mason remained beneath the canopy, Elena and Ivy beside him. Snow didn't fall anymore. Instead, the sky hung low and pale, as if waiting. "Do you remember the first night?" Mason asked. Ivy nodded immediately. "I was cold, but the light was warm." "You were very brave," Elena said. Ivy shook her head. "I was just waiting." Mason felt the weight of that word settle into him. Waiting, not shouting, not demanding, just staying where it was safe enough to be seen. They walked together back toward the car. Halfway there, Ivy stopped. "Mason," she asked. "Yes, will the lights stay on even if I don't come back here every day?" Mason crouched so they were eye level. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "It doesn't depend on you." She seemed to consider that carefully. "Good," she said. "Lights shouldn't get lonely." That night, back in the apartment, Ivy sat at the small desk by the window, crayons spread out in careful rows. Elena cooked dinner, humming softly. Mason sat at the table reading paperwork he no longer resented. Ivy handed him a drawing when she finished. It showed 3 figures standing beneath a canopy, one small, 2 tall. Above them, a wide circle of yellow light stretched outward, touching other small figures along the edges. At the bottom, in careful block letters, she had written, "It stays even when you leave." Mason felt something tighten in his chest. "That's beautiful," he said. Ivy nodded, satisfied. "It's true." Later, after Ivy was tucked into bed, nightlight glowing softly in the corner, Elena joined Mason on the couch. "I used to think safety was something you had to earn," she said quietly. "Or fight for every day." And now, Mason asked. "And now I think it's something you build," she replied. "Brick by brick, light by light." Mason smiled. "I think you're right." Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed, windows glowed. Somewhere down the road, the community station's light shone steadily, marking a place that no longer asked questions of those who needed it. Mason walked home later that night alone. He paused beneath the canopy one last time, standing where Ivy had once sat in the snow. He looked up at the light, strong, reliable, unremarkable in the best way. It didn't change the world, but it changed nights like that one, and as Mason turned toward home, he understood something. With quiet certainty, love didn't always arrive as rescue. Sometimes it arrived as a decision to stop, to stay, and to keep the light on long after you were no longer needed beneath it. And that was enough. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.